My husband's phone rang. I picked it up thinking it was work. A woman whispered, "You left your underwear here again." I said nothing. She giggled, "I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was unforgettable." I ended the call quickly. The voice. It wasn't a stranger. It was. Kevin's phone rang at the worst possible moment, or maybe the best possible moment depending on how you look at it. He was in the shower, I was making his breakfast, and I picked up automatically like I had 1,000 times before. Office showed on the caller ID, so I expected Patricia or maybe Gary with an early morning crisis. Instead, I heard Denise Hartwell's voice, breathy and intimate, talking about underwear and unforgettable nights. The woman I'd considered my friend was confessing her passion for my husband, thinking she was speaking to him. As her words painted a vivid picture of their affair, I realized my perfect marriage was a carefully constructed lie. "You left your underwear here again," she purred, and my blood turned to ice water. That distinctive southern drawl belonged to the woman who'd sat beside me at dinner parties for the past 3 years, who'd admired my homemade desserts and asked for recipes. Denise Hartwell, Gary's elegant wife, the woman I'd genuinely started to consider a friend. "I can't stop thinking about you," she continued, her voice thick with desire. My flour-dusted fingers gripped the phone tighter. In the background, I could hear Kevin's off-key rendition of some pop song echoing from our master bathroom, the same tune he'd been humming for weeks. The sound that usually made me smile now felt like nails on a chalkboard. "Last night was unforgettable," Denise whispered, followed by that soft giggle I'd heard countless times across candlelit restaurant tables and corporate events. I ended the call with fingers that felt disconnected from my body, setting Kevin's phone back on the granite counter as if it might explode. The morning sunlight streaming through our bay windows suddenly felt harsh and exposing. Our renovated kitchen, which had taken us 2 years to complete and represented everything we'd built together, now felt like an elaborate movie set where I'd been playing the role of the happy wife. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about women who refuse to stay silent when betrayed. If you believe that trust broken deserves consequences, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how Angela's revenge unfolds. Tuesday mornings had always been our time. Kevin would emerge from his shower at 7:30 sharp, and I'd have his coffee ready at exactly the right temperature, 2 sugars, splash of cream. He'd read me highlights from the Wall Street Journal while I packed his lunch, our domestic rhythms so perfectly choreographed that friends often joked about our old married couple routine. 20 years we'd been perfecting this dance. 20 years since that chemistry lab at State University where Kevin had been my study partner, all thick glasses and nervous energy, blushing whenever Professor Martinez called on him. I'd found his awkward earnestness endearing, the way he'd stammer through explanations of molecular structures while I corrected his calculations with gentle patience. Our first kiss had happened right there in Lab Building C, surrounded by the sterile smell of formaldehyde and the buzz of fluorescent lights. Kevin had been explaining covalent bonds when I'd leaned over and kissed him, tasting coffee and uncertainty on his lips. "Best chemistry lesson ever," he'd whispered afterward, and I'd laughed at his terrible pun while falling completely in love. The vacation photos magnet to our refrigerator caught my eye. Kevin and me on the beach in Santorini just 3 months ago, his arm tight around my waist as we watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. His smile in that picture looked genuine, his eyes crinkled with what I'd believed was pure contentment. We'd made love that night in our hotel room overlooking the Aegean Sea, and he'd whispered that he felt like the luckiest man alive. Had he been thinking about her even then? I forced myself to continue our morning routine, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind reeled. The coffee maker gurgled as it finished brewing his favorite dark roast, a special blend from a local roastery that cost twice what we used to spend, but Kevin had developed expensive tastes as his salary increased. I buttered his wheat toast precisely the way he liked it, crusts removed, cut diagonally just like his mother used to make. Everything in our kitchen told the story of a couple who knew each other intimately. The copper pots hanging from the rack Kevin had installed himself, cursing colorfully as he fought with the mounting hardware. The herb garden on the windowsill that I'd planted so he could have fresh basil for his famous weekend pasta sauce. The expensive espresso machine we'd splurged on for our 15th anniversary, joking that it cost more than our first car. But now I noticed things that had escaped my attention before. When had the expensive cologne appeared in our bathroom? Kevin had always been practical about grooming, using the same drugstore aftershave for years. The sleek black bottle that now occupied prime real estate on his side of the vanity was definitely new. A gift from a client, he'd said when I'd asked about it months ago. Which client? Or rather, which client's wife? The gym membership card I'd discovered while looking for cash in his wallet last week suddenly took on new significance. Kevin had never been fitness-oriented, preferring books to barbells, wine tastings to workout sessions. But his body had changed over the past 6 months. Leaner, more defined, like a man who'd rediscovered his youth. The shower upstairs shut off with a metallic clank. Kevin would emerge in exactly 3 minutes, towel around his trim waist, asking about his schedule for the day while I recited his appointments from memory. We'd maintained this routine through job changes, family deaths, financial stress, and every other challenge that had tested our marriage over the past 2 decades. But this morning felt different. This morning, I knew our routine was performance art, and I'd been the only one who didn't know I was acting. Kevin's phone sat innocently beside the newspaper, its black screen reflecting the kitchen lights like a dark mirror. How many other calls had come through that device? How many intimate conversations had he shared with Denise while I'd been in the next room, preparing his meals and managing his life with devoted efficiency? The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been the perfect corporate wife, attending every company function, remembering every colleague's name, supporting Kevin's career with unwavering dedication. I'd befriended Denise at those very same events, bonding over shared stories about the loneliness of being married to driven men who traveled frequently for business. She'd seemed so genuine during our conversations at the lake house retreat last month, asking thoughtful questions about my freelance graphic design work and suggesting we collaborate on a project for the company's marketing materials. We talked about the challenges of maintaining our own identities while supporting our husband's ambitions, sharing the kind of intimate conversation that had made me believe I'd finally found a true friend in the corporate wives circle. What a masterful performance that had been. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom on unsteady legs, Kevin's phone clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime I couldn't quite comprehend. The familiar weight of it felt foreign now, contaminated by secrets I'd never imagined. Our bedroom, the sanctuary where we'd shared our most intimate moments for 15 years, suddenly felt like enemy territory. I sank onto our king-sized bed and tried to process the impossible reality. Denise Hartwell had been sleeping with my husband. The elegant woman who'd complimented my cooking at dinner parties, who'd asked for my grandmother's apple pie recipe, who'd seemed genuinely interested in my freelance graphic design work. She'd been living a double life just as elaborate as Kevin's. Every interaction we'd shared over the past year now felt contaminated by deception. Her enthusiastic questions about Kevin's work schedule, disguised as friendly curiosity about corporate life. The way she'd positioned herself next to him during group photos at company events, her hand resting casually on his arm while I'd stood obliviously on his other side. Her suggestion that we couples plan a romantic getaway together next year. A vacation that would have given her and Kevin easy access to each other while Gary and I remained completely unaware. The nausea hit me in waves. I'd confided in this woman about my fears of growing older, about feeling invisible in a youth-obsessed world, about the loneliness of being married to a man whose work consumed most of his attention. She'd listened with such apparent sympathy, offering reassurance about my worth and beauty, all while actively stealing the husband I'd been worried about losing to time and familiarity. Her compliments about Kevin's sharp business mind at dinner parties suddenly felt like calculated intelligence gathering. She'd asked detailed questions about his projects, his travel schedule, his responsibilities at Hartwell Industries. I'd been proud to share his accomplishments, never suspecting she was using my own words to plan their secret meetings. Even her wardrobe choices now seemed strategic. The low-cut emerald dress she'd worn to Gary's birthday celebration, drawing Kevin's attention while he'd complimented her stunning appearance right in front of me. The expensive perfume that had lingered in the air whenever she'd hugged me goodbye, a scent my husband was probably intimately familiar with from their hotel encounters. The sound of Kevin's footsteps on the hardwood stairs snapped me back to immediate reality. He would emerge from the bathroom in moments, towel wrapped around his waist, asking about his schedule for the day while I recited his appointments from memory. The routine that had once felt like intimate choreography now loomed ahead of me like a performance I wasn't sure I could give. Hey babe. Kevin's voice drifted from the bathroom doorway, cheerful and unsuspecting. Who was on the phone earlier? I forced my expression into casual neutrality, grateful he couldn't see the way my hands were shaking. Wrong number. Some confused woman looking for her husband's office. The irony of my lie burned my throat. Some confused woman looking for her husband. How devastatingly accurate that actually was. Kevin appeared in the bedroom doorway, water droplets still clinging to his chest, reaching for the blue dress shirt I'd picked up from the dry cleaner yesterday. I watched him with completely new eyes, studying the body I'd known intimately for 2 decades. When had his shoulders gotten so broad? When had those defined lines appeared on his abdomen? The gym membership. Kevin had never shown interest in fitness beyond our occasional weekend walks, preferring wine tastings to workouts, intellectual pursuits to physical ones. But sometime in the past 6 months he'd transformed his body with the kind of dedication that suggested he was impressing someone specific. Looking good, I managed, hating how easily the compliment came. Kevin smiled, the same crooked grin that had made me fall in love with him in that college chemistry lab. Thanks. I've been feeling more energetic lately. Maybe it's all those early morning workouts. Workouts he'd never mentioned. At a gym I'd discovered only by accident. He selected his watch, the expensive Rolex I'd given him for our 15th anniversary, saving for months to afford the surprise that was supposed to symbolize our enduring commitment. The watch that now seemed like a prop in his elaborate deception, something expensive enough to impress his lover during their clandestine meetings. Big day ahead, Kevin said, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Gary wants to discuss the Peterson account, and I've got that client dinner tonight. Another client dinner. The 3rd this week. My husband's calendar had become increasingly filled with evening obligations that conveniently took him away from home, away from me, away from the domestic life we'd supposedly built together. Which client? I asked, testing him. Morrison Industries. Their CFO is only in town for one night. The lie flowed so smoothly I almost believed it myself. Almost. Kevin moved through our bedroom with the confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe, selecting his clothes with care that suggested he was dressing for someone whose opinion mattered. When had he started caring so much about his appearance? When had our marriage become secondary to his grooming routine? Don't forget we're having dinner with Gary and Denise this weekend, he said, straightening his collar in our dresser mirror. My stomach lurched at the mention of their names together, but I managed to smile enthusiastically. I'm looking forward to it. Denise mentioned she found a new restaurant she wants to try. Kevin's reflection met my eyes in the mirror for just a moment, and I searched his face for any flicker of guilt or recognition. Nothing. He seemed genuinely unconcerned, either because he was an exceptional liar or because he truly believed his deception was foolproof. She has great taste, Kevin said, and the double meaning made my skin crawl. He kissed my forehead before heading downstairs, his cologne, that expensive, unfamiliar scent, lingering in the air like evidence of his transformation. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the garage door opening, his BMW pulling out of our driveway. The same sounds that had marked the beginning of my solitary workdays for years, but this morning they felt like a funeral march for everything I'd believed about my life. Alone in our bedroom I attempted to return to normalcy, but my body had other plans. My hands shook so violently I couldn't hold my coffee cup without spilling. Simple tasks like making the bed became exercises in frustrated concentration as the fitted sheet slipped from my trembling fingers. The familiar routine of straightening Kevin's side of the closet, hanging up the towel he'd dropped, organizing the ties he'd rejected, felt like tending to the belongings of a stranger. I caught my reflection in our full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My face looked gaunt, my eyes wide with shock that hadn't yet crystallized into anger. At 41, I'd always felt confident about aging gracefully, secure in Kevin's consistent affection and attraction. But now I found myself cataloging every line around my eyes, every silver thread in my dark brown hair, wondering if these natural signs of time had driven my husband into another woman's arms. Was I not enough anymore? Had I become so familiar, so predictable, that he'd needed the thrill of forbidden passion to feel alive? The questions circled relentlessly, each one cutting deeper than the last. Food became impossible. I'd prepared Kevin's favorite breakfast out of habit, but when I tried to eat the leftover pancakes, they tasted like cardboard mixed with ash. Even water felt foreign in my mouth, like my body was rejecting everything familiar as potentially contaminated. Sleep would prove equally elusive. That night, I lay beside Kevin as he breathed peacefully, his presence in our bed feeling alien and threatening. Every small sound he made, the soft whistle of air through his nose, the rustle of sheets as he shifted positions, seemed amplified in the darkness. I found myself studying his sleeping face, searching for signs of the stranger who'd been deceiving me daily. The house phone rang at exactly 8:30 that evening, just as I was pretending to read while Kevin showered before his alleged client dinner. Emma's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered with desperate gratitude for any distraction from my spiraling thoughts. Angela. Emma's voice carried an unusual gravity that immediately put me on alert. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. About you seeming different lately. I'm fine, I said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. No, you're not. Emma had always possessed an uncanny ability to see through my protective facades, a talent that had both comforted and frustrated me throughout our lives. Look, I need to tell you something. Melissa, my friend who works in accounting at Hartwell, she's been asking me careful questions about you and Kevin. My heart began racing. What kind of questions? Emma hesitated, and I could picture her chewing her bottom lip the way she did when wrestling with difficult truths. She's noticed things at the office. Kevin's been seen around town with business associates at strange hours. Restaurants that seem more romantic than professional. Hotels during what should be normal business hours. The careful way she chose her words made it clear she was trying to prepare me for devastating news without being the one to deliver the final blow. But I already knew what she was dancing around. The question that terrified me was how long other people had been aware of Kevin's deception while I'd remained completely oblivious. Emma, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, how long have people been talking? How long had I been the subject of whispered conversations and pitying glances while living in complete ignorance? I don't know, Emma admitted, her voice softer now. Melissa first mentioned seeing Kevin at that new steakhouse downtown about 6 weeks ago. He was with a woman, but it was during business hours, so she thought it might be legitimate. But then she saw them again at the Marriott bar last Tuesday afternoon, and their body language was... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would confirm my worst fears. 6 weeks. At minimum, Kevin's affair had been public knowledge among his colleagues for 6 weeks while I'd been playing the devoted wife, packing his lunches and ironing his shirts and believing every lie he'd fed me about working late. After Emma left, promising to call if she heard anything else, I sat in my empty house and felt the walls closing in. Kevin wouldn't be home until after 11, assuming he was actually at a client dinner and not in some hotel room with Denise. The thought of waiting 6 hours for his return, of pretending everything was normal when he walked through our door, felt impossible. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Kevin's laptop sat closed on the kitchen counter, the same spot where he'd left it every morning for the past year. He'd started password protecting it recently, claiming it was new company policy for data security. But Kevin had always been predictable with passwords, using the same combinations for everything from our Netflix account to his gym membership. I opened the silver laptop with hands that had stopped shaking, replaced by something colder and more focused. The password prompt appeared, cursor blinking expectantly. I typed our anniversary date, June 15, 2004, and held my breath. Access granted. The browser history loaded like a roadmap to hell. Hotel reservations at boutique locations I'd never heard of. Dinner reservations for 2 at restaurants Kevin had never mentioned. Places with romantic names like Candlelight Bistro and The Secret Garden. Online flower deliveries to an address on Elm Street that meant nothing to me. Each entry was time-stamped, creating a timeline of deception that stretched back 8 months. 8 months. While I'd been planning our anniversary trip to Italy, Kevin had been building an entirely separate life with another woman. I screenshot everything with methodical precision, my emotional shock transforming into cold analytical focus. The credit card statements painted an even more detailed picture. Charges for lingerie at expensive boutiques, purchases at jewelry stores during his lunch breaks, spa treatments for 2 at luxury resorts. Our joint savings account had been funding an elaborate romance I'd never been part of. But it was the deeper financial records that made my blood run cold. Hidden in a folder innocuously labeled tax docs, Kevin had always been laughably unimaginative with his deceptions, I found spreadsheets that had nothing to do with our personal finances. These documents detailed payments from companies I'd never heard of. Premier Consulting Solutions, Strategic Development LLC, Pinnacle Advisory Services. The names sounded professional enough, but when I searched for them online, they appeared to exist only on paper. Invoices showed Hartwell Industries paying these shell companies for consulting services that seemed deliberately vague. Strategic planning consultation, market analysis services, executive advisory sessions. Each invoice bore Kevin's signature as the authorizing officer, approving payments that ranged from $15,000 to $50,000 per transaction. The amounts were staggering. Over the past year, nearly $500,000 had flowed from Gary's company to these fictitious firms, then disappeared into accounts I couldn't trace. Kevin's affair wasn't just personal betrayal. It was systematic theft from the man who'd given him everything. My hands moved across the keyboard with increasing urgency, following digital breadcrumbs that led to more shocking discoveries. Bank routing numbers that traced to offshore institutions. Wire transfer confirmations to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Password-protected files that took me 3 tries to crack, using variations of significant dates from Kevin's life until I found the combination that unlocked his deepest secrets. The offshore banking records made me gasp audibly in our silent kitchen. An account bearing both Kevin's and Denise's names showed a balance that defied comprehension. Over $800,000 accumulated in just 12 months. The transaction history revealed systematic transfers from the shell companies, money that had originated from Gary's business and been laundered through multiple accounts before landing in this Caribbean paradise for thieves. This wasn't just an affair funded by stolen dinners and hotel rooms. This was an elaborate embezzlement scheme using Kevin and Denise's romantic relationship as the perfect cover. Who would suspect a man's boss's wife of being his criminal partner? Who would think to look for financial crimes hidden beneath passionate betrayal? The scope of their deception was breathtaking. They turned their affair into a business model, using their positions of trust within Gary's company to systematically rob him blind. Every intimate encounter had been funded by stolen money. Every whispered confession of love had been paid for with embezzled funds. Their passion was literally criminal. My phone buzzed with a text message. Emma again, can I come over? I think we need to talk in person. She arrived 20 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee from my favorite downtown cafe and wearing the worried expression she'd perfected during our childhood whenever I'd gotten myself into trouble that required sisterly intervention. I wasn't completely honest on the phone, Emma said, settling into our breakfast nook where Kevin and I had shared thousands of meals. Melissa didn't just casually mention seeing Kevin around town. She's been actively asking questions because she's noticed discrepancies in the company books. My coffee grew cold as Emma revealed the extent of her knowledge. Her friend Melissa had been conducting her own informal investigation, tracking unusual patterns in Hartwell Industries' financial records. Payments to vendors that couldn't be verified. Consulting fees that seemed excessive for the services supposedly provided. Invoice signatures that didn't match normal approval patterns. She thinks someone's been stealing from the company, Emma said quietly. And Kevin's name keeps appearing on the authorization documents. The revelation that others had suspected criminal activity while I'd been worried about marital problems felt surreal. I'd been focused on the wrong betrayal entirely. While I'd been cataloging signs of infidelity, Kevin had been committing felonies that could destroy not just our marriage but Gary's entire business empire. There's something else, Emma said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Melissa saw Kevin and Denise together last week at that new downtown hotel. The one with the penthouse suites that cost more per night than most people make in a month. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Kevin and Denise weren't just having an affair. They were living like royalty on stolen money, funding their passion with embezzled funds while their spouses remained completely unaware of both the personal and financial betrayal. I looked at my sister across our kitchen table, this woman who'd been trying to protect me from a truth I was only beginning to understand, and realized that my perfect life hadn't just been built on lies. It had been built on crimes. The realization sat in my chest like a stone as I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table. Bank statements, screenshots, financial records. Enough documentation to destroy both my marriage and Gary's company. But destroying wasn't enough anymore. I needed justice. I needed an ally who had the power to make Kevin and Denise pay for what they'd stolen from both of us. Gary Hartwell had built his company from nothing, starting in a cramped office above a deli 30 years ago and growing it into one of the city's most respected firms. He valued loyalty above profit, often keeping underperforming employees because he believed in second chances. He'd given Kevin that crucial promotion 5 years ago not because of superior qualifications, but because he trusted him completely. Now his most trusted employee and beloved wife were systematically destroying everything he'd built. I spent the weekend organizing my evidence with the methodical precision of a prosecutor preparing for trial. Financial records went into one folder, hotel receipts and restaurant charges into another, the offshore banking information into a third. By Sunday evening, I had enough documentation to send both Kevin and Denise to federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. But I needed someone with corporate authority to act on this information. Someone who could ensure Kevin and Denise faced consequences that matched the scope of their crimes. Monday morning, I dressed with deliberate care. The navy suit I'd worn to our last anniversary dinner, the pearls Kevin had given me for Christmas, the confidence I'd learned from years of corporate events where I'd played the supportive wife. But this time I was playing for different stakes. Hartwell Industries occupied 15 floors of the city's most prestigious business tower, its marble lobby gleaming under crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's cars. I'd been here dozens of times for company functions, but never as anything other than Kevin's wife. This morning I walked through those glass doors with purpose that transformed me from decoration into threat. Patricia, Gary's assistant for the past decade, looked up from her computer with professional politeness that shifted to confusion when she recognized me. "Mrs. Mitchell. How lovely to see you. Are you here for Kevin? He's in the Peterson meeting until—" "I need to see Gary," I interrupted, my voice carrying an authority that surprised us both. "It's about Denise and the missing funds." Patricia's professional mask slipped for just a moment, long enough for me to catch the flicker of recognition in her eyes. He knew. Of course she knew. Gary's assistant would be privy to financial irregularities, unusual patterns, suspicious transactions. Her careful expression confirmed my suspicion that office gossip had been circulating about problems I'd been too naive to imagine. "I'll see if Mr. Hartwell is available," she said, reaching for her phone with fingers that weren't quite steady. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in Gary's corner office, 20 floors above the city, watching a man's world collapse in real time. Gary had always reminded me of my father. Distinguished silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the bearing of someone who'd earned respect through decades of honest work. The office reflected his personality. Solid oak furniture, framed photos of company milestones, awards for community service and business ethics. "Angela," he said warmly, rising from behind his massive desk. "What a pleasant surprise. Coffee?" I declined with a shake of my head, placing my phone on his polished desktop like I was setting down a grenade. "Before we discuss the financial evidence I've discovered, you need to hear something." Gary's paternal warmth flickered with confusion, but he settled back into his chair with the patience of a man accustomed to handling crises. I pressed play on the recording I'd made of Denise's call, the volume adjusted so her intimate confessions filled his elegant office with crystal clarity. "You left your underwear here again," Denise's voice purred through the speaker. Gary's face went ashen, his hands gripping the arms of his leather chair. "I can't stop thinking about you," she continued, her giggle echoing off the mahogany walls. I watched 20 years of trust crumble in Gary's eyes as his wife's voice painted a vivid picture of passionate encounters with my husband. When the recording reached "Last night was unforgettable," Gary aged a decade in seconds, his distinguished features collapsing as the magnitude of personal betrayal registered. The silence that followed was profound. Gary stared at my phone as if it might offer some explanation that would make sense of what he'd just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How long?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, sliding the folder of financial evidence across his desk. "But it's not just an affair, Gary. They've been stealing from you." He studied the documents with the focus of a man whose entire understanding of reality was being rewritten. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. Invoices for services from companies that existed only on paper. Offshore account records bearing both their names. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. $800,000, Gary said finally, his voice hollow with disbelief. My own wife. My most trusted employee. I watched his transformation happen in real time, the initial shock giving way to rage, then settling into something far more dangerous. The kind of cold calculation that had built a business empire and wouldn't allow that empire to be destroyed from within. What do you propose we do about it? He asked, and I recognized a kindred spirit in his controlled fury. We spent the next 2 hours planning their destruction with the methodical precision of military strategists. Gary would quietly commission a forensic audit, using his executive authority to examine the company's books without triggering suspicion. I would continue playing the unsuspecting wife, gathering additional evidence from home while maintaining the facade that kept Kevin comfortable and careless. They think they're untouchable, Gary said, studying the offshore banking records with disgust. They're using their affair as camouflage for theft. But passion makes people stupid. Overconfident. He was right. Kevin and Denise had grown so comfortable in their deception that they'd become reckless, leaving digital trails that any competent investigator could follow. Their love affair had become their weakness. We can't confront them emotionally, Gary continued, his business mind taking control. That would only give them time to hide assets and destroy evidence. We need to build an airtight legal case that ensures their destruction is complete and permanent. The word destruction hung between us, heavy with shared purpose. This wasn't about healing our marriages or seeking counseling or any of the conventional responses to infidelity. This was about justice, about making them pay for crimes that went far beyond broken vows. As I left Gary's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering Kevin's betrayal. Control. For the first time in days, I had a plan, an ally, and the resources to fight back. Gary Hartwell was a powerful man with extensive connections in law enforcement, finance, and corporate security. Combined with my intimate access to Kevin's private life, we formed a partnership that could destroy our enemies completely. But walking to my car in the parking garage, I caught my reflection in the tinted windows and paused. The woman staring back looked different. Harder, more focused, with eyes that held calculation instead of pain. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of planning another person's destruction with scientific precision. The transformation both frightened and empowered me. That evening, I sat across from Kevin at our dining room table, listening to him describe his day with careful attention to every lie and omission. When he mentioned Gary's upcoming birthday party, suggesting we purchase an expensive gift to show our appreciation, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to compose myself. Are you feeling all right? Kevin asked when I returned, his concern seeming genuine enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about his capacity for deception. Just a headache, I lied smoothly, the same kind of effortless deception he'd been practicing on me for months. The acting required to maintain normalcy while planning his downfall was exhausting, but I was discovering reserves of strength I'd never known I possessed. Each forced smile became a weapon in my arsenal. Every loving gesture was proof of my ability to deceive just as skillfully as he had been deceiving me. I was becoming exactly the kind of person I'd never thought I could be. And I wasn't sure if that terrified me or thrilled me. The transformation accelerated over the following days. I threw myself into the role of unsuspecting wife with a dedication that would have impressed any acting coach, preparing Kevin's favorite meals while my phone recorded his conversations from the kitchen counter. He'd grown comfortable discussing business over dinner, never suspecting that his devoted spouse was documenting every coded reference to their criminal enterprise. Project transfers meant money laundering. Client meetings were romantic rendezvous. Quarterly reviews referred to their timeline for disappearing with stolen funds. I learned their language like a spy mastering enemy communications, each decoded phrase adding another nail to their professional coffins. Kevin's confidence in my ignorance made him careless. He'd take calls from Denise while I folded laundry in the next room, their conversations drifting through our open doorway as I memorized every detail. They discussed moving larger amounts through the shell companies, complained about Gary's increased attention to company finances, and planned weekend getaways funded by embezzled money. The Peterson account should clear another $60,000 next week, Kevin had said during one such call, lounging in his study while I organized his sock drawer. We can move it through strategic development, then transfer to the island account by Friday. My hands had remained steady as I matched his dress socks into pairs, but inside, I was cataloging every word for Gary's forensic accountants to analyze. The most shocking discovery was how much Kevin enjoyed the deception itself. He'd laugh during these calls, not just with romantic pleasure but with genuine amusement at their successful manipulation of Gary. "He still thinks I'm his golden boy," Kevin had chuckled to Denise. "Poor old man has no idea his wife and his protégé are bleeding him dry." That casual cruelty toward Gary, a man who'd treated Kevin like a son, revealed depths of callousness I'd never suspected in my husband. The Kevin I'd married had been capable of great kindness, had cried during sad movies and donated generously to animal shelters. This stranger who mocked the man who'd given him everything was someone I'd never known existed. My phone rang Wednesday afternoon while Kevin was at his alleged gym session. Denise's name appeared on my caller ID and I answered with the bright enthusiasm I'd perfected over the past week. "Angela, darling," Denise's voice bubbled with false warmth. "I was hoping we could grab lunch tomorrow. Just us girls. I've been so busy lately and I miss our conversations." The audacity took my breath away. This woman was actively sleeping with my husband while inviting me to lunch, maintaining our friendship as cover for her crimes. But I'd learned to match her performance with my own. "I'd love to," I said, injecting genuine excitement into my voice. "That new bistro downtown? I've been dying to try their wine selection." "Perfect. Noon tomorrow." During that lunch I watched Denise perform the role of concerned friend with masterful precision. She asked invasive questions about Kevin's schedule disguised as sympathetic interest in our marriage. "He's been working such long hours lately. You must feel neglected," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand with perfectly calculated compassion. "Actually, he's been more attentive recently," I lied smoothly, feeding her false information about our relationship dynamics. "We've been talking about taking a romantic vacation soon. Maybe somewhere tropical." I watched her process this misinformation, saw the flicker of concern cross her features before she recovered her composure. She was gathering intelligence about Kevin's availability, trying to determine if I suspected anything that might threaten their operation. "How wonderful," she said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Where are you thinking of going?" "The Cayman Islands," I said innocently, watching her face for any reaction to the location where she and Kevin had hidden their stolen money. "Kevin mentioned it has excellent banking. I mean beaches." Denise's laugh sounded forced. "I'm sure it does." By the time our lunch ended, I'd provided her with carefully crafted misinformation about Kevin's schedule and my own daily routines, while she'd revealed more about their operation than she'd intended. Her questions about our financial planning and Kevin's access to company accounts confirmed they were still actively stealing, still planning their eventual escape. Kevin's arrogance reached new heights that week. He brought home expensive gifts with increasingly transparent excuses. A silk scarf that was supposedly a client appreciation token, diamond earrings he claimed were a conference door prize. The jewelry still had price tags from boutiques I'd never shopped at, clearly intended for someone with different taste and coloring than mine. Thursday evening he announced another business trip with barely concealed excitement. "Atlanta," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Morrison Industries wants to discuss a major contract. Gary thinks it could be worth millions." I nodded supportively while accessing his email on my phone under the dinner table. The hotel reservation was for 2 people, the suite described as romantic, with champagne service and rose petals. Even his lies had stopped requiring creativity. "How long will you be gone?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Just the weekend. Back Sunday night." I kissed him goodbye Friday morning with lips that felt like plastic, watching him load a suitcase that probably contained lingerie he'd never seen me wear. His excitement was palpable, the anticipation of a man heading to a romantic getaway with his lover. Meanwhile, Gary's forensic investigation was revealing the true scope of their crimes. We met Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop across town, far from anyone who might recognize us as anything other than casual acquaintances. The preliminary audit results made our initial estimates look conservative. $2.3 million, Gary said quietly, sliding a folder across our small table. "They've been at this for over 2 years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide the transfers. The forensic accountants had identified a pattern of fictitious vendors, inflated contracts, and diverted funds that painted a picture of systematic theft far beyond what I'd initially discovered. Kevin and Denise had created an entire shadow economy within Gary's company, complete with fake invoices, manufactured consulting fees, and elaborate paper trails designed to confuse anyone who might investigate. "They're planning something big," I told Gary, sharing the intelligence I'd gathered from Kevin's recorded conversations. He mentioned accelerating their timeline, moving larger amounts through the system before someone notices the patterns. Gary's expression hardened with each detail I revealed. The man who'd been betrayed by his wife and employee was transforming into something far more dangerous. A CEO who'd built an empire and wouldn't allow it to be destroyed from within. "Then we end this before they can disappear," he said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of someone who'd spent decades outmaneuvering business rivals. "Next Friday. Emergency board meeting. We'll present everything at once. The affair, the embezzlement, the offshore accounts." I nodded, feeling the weight of our conspiracy settling around me like armor. In 1 week, Kevin and Denise would face the consequences of their crimes. But sitting in that anonymous coffee shop, planning another person's destruction with clinical precision, I realized I'd become someone I barely recognized. The question was whether I could live with who I was becoming. I got my answer Thursday afternoon when Emma arrived at my door unannounced, her usually perfect composure cracked with guilt and determination. Rain dripped from her auburn hair as she stood on my porch, clutching a manila envelope and looking like she'd been wrestling with demons for weeks. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I can't keep lying to you anymore." My stomach dropped as I led her to the living room where Kevin and I had hosted countless gatherings, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and all the milestones of what I'd thought was a happy marriage. Emma perched on the edge of our cream sofa, the envelope balanced on her knees like a bomb waiting to detonate. "I've known about Kevin's affair for 3 months, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I saw him with Denise at Romano's back in February. I was having lunch with my college roommate, and there they were at a corner table holding hands like teenagers. 3 months. While I'd been planning our anniversary trip and worrying about normal marital concerns, Emma had been carrying this devastating secret, watching me live in ignorance while knowing my world was built on lies. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Because you seemed so happy. Because I hoped I was wrong, that maybe it was just a business meeting that looked intimate from across a restaurant. Because I was terrified of being the person who destroyed your marriage." She opened the envelope with shaking fingers, revealing photographs that made my blood freeze. Kevin and Denise in passionate embrace outside a downtown hotel. Kevin helping her into his car, his hand lingering on her waist. Denise laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, her face radiant with the kind of joy I'd thought belonged to me. "I hired a private investigator," Emma confessed. "I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent, but I needed proof before destroying your life with suspicions." The photographs painted a story of genuine passion, not just physical attraction but emotional connection. In one image, Kevin was pushing a strand of hair from Denise's face with a tenderness I recognized from our own courtship. In another, they were sharing dessert at an expensive restaurant, feeding each other with the intimacy of lovers who'd moved far beyond casual encounters. "There's more," Emma said, her voice breaking. "The investigator discovered Kevin's been involved with other women too. This isn't his first affair." The additional photographs showed Kevin with women I didn't recognize. A blonde leaving his hotel room, a brunette meeting him for drinks at various bars across the city. The timeline suggested a pattern of infidelity stretching back years, with Denise being only the most recent and financially dangerous of his conquests. While I processed Emma's devastating revelations, Gary was conducting his own investigation that revealed an even more sinister truth. We met that evening at our usual coffee shop, his face grim with discoveries that made our personal betrayal seem almost minor by comparison. "This goes far beyond embezzlement," Gary said, sliding a thick folder across our corner table. "My private investigator found evidence that Kevin and Denise have been feeding confidential information to my competitors for over 2 years. The documents revealed a systematic campaign of corporate espionage. Bidding information for major contracts had been leaked to rival firms, allowing them to undercut Gary's proposals with impossible precision. Proprietary technology developments had found their way to competitors who'd beaten Hartwell Industries to market with suspiciously similar products. Client lists and strategic plans had been sold to the highest bidders, explaining why Gary had been losing long-term business relationships to companies that seemed to anticipate his every move. Denise had access to everything, Gary continued, his voice hollow with betrayal. Board meeting minutes, financial projections, merger discussions. I shared everything with her because she was my wife, my trusted partner. She was selling our secrets while sleeping in my bed. The affair hadn't been a crime of passion that led to financial theft. It had been a calculated business operation disguised as romance, with Kevin and Denise using their relationship to systematically destroy Gary's company from within. But the most chilling discovery came when Gary's investigator traced their network of victims. Kevin and Denise hadn't targeted only Hartwell Industries. They'd been running similar operations at other companies, using seduction and manipulation to gain access to corporate secrets and financial systems. I found 3 other cases, Gary said, producing additional files. Other executives whose marriages were destroyed while their companies were robbed blind. I studied the victim profiles with growing horror. Sarah Chen, whose husband had mysteriously abandoned her and their children after becoming involved in Kevin's investment opportunities, leaving her bankrupt while millions disappeared into offshore accounts. Michael Rodriguez, whose wife had emptied their retirement savings to fund what she believed was a legitimate business partnership with Kevin before vanishing entirely. Jennifer Walsh, whose seemingly perfect marriage had imploded when her husband's affair with Denise was exposed, but not before their family business had been stripped of its assets through fraudulent consulting contracts. The pattern was identical in each case: seduction, manipulation, financial theft, and abandonment. Kevin and Denise were predators who'd refined their methods through practice, destroying lives with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They're not lovers, I realized, the truth crystallizing with horrible clarity. They're business partners who use sex as their primary weapon. Gary nodded grimly. The affair is just their cover story. Their real relationship is criminal, not romantic. That night, I intercepted the phone conversation that revealed their true endgame. Kevin was in the garden, speaking quietly while he thought I was upstairs watching television. From my position at the darkened kitchen window, I could hear every word. The timeline needs to accelerate, Kevin was saying. Gary's been asking too many questions about the Morrison contract. We need to trigger the crisis next week and get out before he figures out the pattern. Denise's voice crackled through the speakerphone. The Zurich account is ready. Once we transfer the final batch and expose the audit discrepancies, Gary will be so busy trying to save his company that he won't notice we've disappeared. They weren't just planning to steal more money. They were orchestrating Gary's complete destruction. Their exit strategy involved framing him for their crimes, ensuring he'd be too busy fighting federal charges to pursue them internationally. The coldness of their planning revealed the truth I'd been struggling to accept. They didn't view me and Gary as people they'd hurt in pursuit of love. We were obstacles to be eliminated, casualties in their war against anyone foolish enough to trust them. Standing in my dark kitchen, listening to my husband plan my financial ruin with his criminal partner, I realized the full extent of the danger we were facing. They weren't just thieves. They were destroyers who left nothing but devastation in their wake. The weight of that realization kept me awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Kevin slept peacefully beside me, one arm thrown across the space where I used to curl against his chest. In the darkness, I found myself studying his sleeping face and wondering when I'd stopped recognizing the man I'd married. More disturbing was the question of when I'd stopped recognizing myself. At 3 a.m, I slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, flicking on the harsh overhead lights that made everything look stark and unforgiving. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, sharper somehow, with eyes that held calculation instead of warmth. The soft curves of contentment had been replaced by angular tension, as if my bones were reshaping themselves around my anger. When had I become someone who could plan another person's destruction with clinical precision? When had the devoted wife who'd spent 20 years nurturing our relationship transformed into someone capable of methodical revenge? Emma's words from earlier that week echoed in my mind. "You seem different, Angie. Harder somehow." She'd said it with concern, not judgment, but the observation stung because it was accurate. I was harder, colder, more willing to cause pain than I'd ever imagined possible. The person staring back from the mirror was someone who'd spent the past 2 weeks documenting evidence with the focus of a forensic accountant. Someone who'd lied to her husband's face while planning his downfall. Someone who'd formed an alliance with his boss to ensure his complete destruction. I'd crossed lines I'd never thought I'd approach, and the most unsettling part was how natural it had begun to feel. Was I seeking justice, or had my desire for revenge transformed me into someone as calculating and ruthless as the people who'd betrayed me? My phone buzzed with a text from Gary. "Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. New developments you need to know about." The next afternoon, Gary's usual controlled demeanor had been replaced by something darker and more dangerous. He'd ordered his coffee black instead of his typical cream and sugar, a small change that somehow made him seem like a different person entirely. "I've been thinking about their punishment," he said without preamble, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Prison isn't enough. They need to be destroyed completely, publicly, so thoroughly that they'll never recover." Gary outlined strategies that went far beyond legal prosecution. He wanted to involve tabloid journalists to ensure maximum public humiliation, to manipulate the legal proceedings to guarantee the longest possible prison sentences, to use his extensive corporate connections to ensure Kevin and Denise would be unemployable even after serving their time. "We could leak the affair details to the business press," he suggested, his eyes bright with malicious planning. Corporate executives stealing from their company to fund an affair? The story would go viral. They'd be infamous. The methodical way he planned their destruction revealed a side of Gary I'd never suspected existed. This wasn't the paternal figure who'd mentored Kevin's career or the kind husband who'd always treated Denise with gentle affection. This was someone who'd built a business empire by outmaneuvering ruthless competitors. Someone capable of crushing his enemies with systematic precision. "You're enjoying this," I said, recognizing something in his expression that matched my own dark satisfaction in planning Kevin's downfall. Gary's smile was cold as winter. "They made it personal when they decided to destroy my life's work. Now I'm going to make sure they pay for it until the day they die." His transformation from grieving husband to calculating predator should have frightened me, but instead I felt a disturbing sense of kinship. We'd both been betrayed by people we'd trusted completely, and we'd both discovered a capacity for revenge that surprised us. But the cost of maintaining our conspiracy was becoming impossible to ignore. I found myself distant from friends who called with innocent invitations, paranoid about who else might be keeping secrets from me. When my college roommate Lisa called to catch up, I found myself analyzing every word for hidden meanings, wondering if she'd known about Kevin's affairs before I did. My relationship with my mother suffered most dramatically. During our weekly phone calls, her gentle questions about Kevin's work and our marriage plans felt like interrogations I couldn't answer honestly. When she mentioned how happy I'd seemed at Christmas, how radiant I'd looked dancing with Kevin at Emma's wedding, I snapped with uncharacteristic cruelness. "People aren't always what they seem, Mom. Sometimes the happiest marriages are the biggest lies." The hurt in her voice when she asked what was wrong made me hate myself, but I couldn't explain without revealing the whole devastating truth. So I retreated further into isolation, cutting myself off from the support system I'd need when Kevin's world finally collapsed. The deepest betrayal came when I discovered what Kevin had done to our personal finances. While examining our joint accounts with the same methodical approach I'd applied to his company crimes, I found evidence that he'd been systematically looting our marriage for months. Our retirement savings, 30 years of careful planning and disciplined investing, had been transferred to accounts I couldn't access without his signature. The emergency fund we'd built to weather unexpected crises had vanished into investments I didn't understand. Even the inheritance from my father, money that was supposed to secure my future, had been moved to offshore holdings that existed only on paper. Kevin hadn't just been stealing from Gary's company. He'd been preparing to leave me financially ruined, ensuring I'd have nothing while he disappeared with Denise to live like royalty on their stolen fortune. The calculated cruelty of his planning was breathtaking. While I'd been worrying about our marriage, he'd been systematically dismantling my financial security. While I'd been packing his lunches and supporting his career, he'd been transferring my inheritance to accounts I'd never be able to touch. This wasn't passion overcoming judgment. This was premeditated destruction of everything I'd worked for, planned with the same methodical precision I was now using against him. Sitting in our home office surrounded by evidence of his financial abuse, I felt the last remnants of sympathy for Kevin evaporate like morning frost. The man I'd loved had never really existed. In his place was a predator who'd been systematically destroying my life while I'd helped him do it. I called Gary immediately, my voice steady with newfound resolve. I found more evidence, I said. And I'm ready to end this completely. Gary's voice through the phone carried a satisfaction that matched my own grim determination. Good. Meet me at the office tomorrow morning. We need to coordinate the final phase. The next 48 hours blurred together in a haze of technical preparation that made me feel like I was starring in a corporate espionage thriller. Gary provided me with surveillance equipment that seemed impossibly sophisticated for a legitimate business. Recording devices smaller than quarters, software that could remotely access phone systems, cameras disguised as everyday objects. Where did you get all this? I asked, examining a recording device that looked identical to a pen. Gary's smile was enigmatic. 30 years in business teaches you to prepare for every kind of betrayal. I've been planning for something like this longer than you might think. His answer raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered, but I was too deep into our conspiracy to question his methods now. Installing the recording software on Kevin's phone required waiting for one of his marathon shower sessions. I slipped into our bedroom while he sang off-key behind the frosted glass, my hands steady as I connected his device to the laptop Gary had provided. The software installed in less than 3 minutes, creating a digital bridge that would transmit every call directly to a secure server Gary controlled. Done. I texted Gary using the encrypted messaging app he'd insisted we use for all communications. Perfect. Phase 2 begins tonight. That evening, Gary hosted what appeared to be an elegant dinner party to celebrate Hartwell Industries' successful third quarter. The invitation had gone out to the company's senior staff and their spouses, a tradition Gary had maintained for years. Kevin had been excited about attending, viewing it as another opportunity to strengthen his position within the company hierarchy. If only he'd known he was walking into a trap. Gary's home reflected his success and taste, understated elegance with museum-quality art and furniture that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. Crystal glasses caught the light from antique chandeliers as conversations flowed over carefully prepared courses. To any outside observer, it was a perfect corporate social gathering. But 3 of the people at that table knew it was actually an elaborate sting operation. I watched Kevin and Denise perform their charade of casual acquaintance with the fascination of someone studying dangerous animals in captivity. They were masterful actors, maintaining appropriate distance while communicating through a complex system of glances and subtle gestures. When Kevin complimented Denise's dress, his tone remained professionally appropriate, but his eyes lingered just long enough to suggest appreciation that went beyond politeness. Denise responded with equal skill, thanking him with a smile that appeared grateful rather than intimate. But under the table I watched her foot find his, their secret connection happening inches from where Gary and I sat pretending obliviousness. "Angela's been such a dear friend," Denise said during the main course, her voice warm with manufactured affection. "We really must plan that lunch we've been discussing." The audacity of maintaining our friendship while actively destroying my life was breathtaking. She complimented my earrings, the same vintage sapphires she'd admired at the lake house retreat, while planning my financial ruin. Her performance was so convincing that I almost questioned my own evidence, wondering if I'd somehow misunderstood the scope of their betrayal. But then she made a mistake. When Kevin mentioned his upcoming business trip to Charleston, Denise's eyes lit up with interest that lasted a fraction too long before she caught herself. "Business trips can be so exhausting," she said, but her tone suggested the opposite sentiment entirely. Gary caught it too. Across the table, his eyes met mine with a look that confirmed we'd just witnessed their affair continuing right in front of us. After dinner, as we gathered in Gary's living room for after-dinner drinks, Kevin's confidence reached new heights of dangerous arrogance. He'd always been charming at social gatherings, but tonight he seemed almost intoxicated by his own perceived success at deception. "Gary, you've built something remarkable here," Kevin said, gesturing around the elegant room with proprietary pride. "This company, this lifestyle, it's everything I aspire to achieve." The irony was devastating. Kevin was complimenting the empire he was systematically destroying, expressing admiration for the success he was stealing. Gary's smile in response was perfectly controlled, but I could see the fury burning behind his eyes. "Success requires loyalty," Gary replied smoothly. I've always valued employees who understand that trust is the foundation of everything we build. Kevin nodded seriously, apparently missing the pointed nature of Gary's comment entirely. Absolutely. Loyalty and integrity are everything in business. Denise agreed enthusiastically, raising her wine glass in a toast to honest partnerships. The clink of crystal felt like funeral bells for their criminal enterprise. By the time we left Gary's house that night, Kevin was practically floating with satisfaction. He'd spent the evening in the company of his victims, discussing loyalty and integrity while planning to rob them blind, completely unaware that his every word had been recorded by devices hidden throughout Gary's home. Great party, Kevin said as we drove home through empty streets. Gary seemed particularly relaxed tonight. I think he's finally starting to trust my judgment completely. I managed an appropriate response while my mind raced through the implications of what we'd just witnessed. Kevin and Denise's arrogance had reached levels that would make their downfall even more satisfying. They'd become so comfortable with their deception that they'd stopped being careful, stopped considering the possibility that their victims might fight back. The following Monday, Gary sent out an email that made my heart race with anticipation. Emergency board meeting scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. to address financial irregularities requiring immediate attention. The vague language was deliberate, designed to avoid triggering suspicion while ensuring all necessary parties would be present. Gary had coordinated with law enforcement to ensure Kevin and Denise could be arrested immediately following their termination, preventing any opportunity for them to flee or destroy remaining evidence. I spent the week preparing my presentation materials with the methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case for the trial of the century. The recorded phone conversations, photographic evidence of their meetings, financial documents tracing their embezzlement, everything organized for maximum dramatic impact. Thursday night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, anticipation and terror warring in my chest. Tomorrow, Kevin would walk into that boardroom expecting another routine corporate meeting. Instead, he'd face the complete destruction of everything he'd stolen and built through deception. The woman who'd answered that wrong phone call 3 weeks ago would never have imagined herself capable of orchestrating someone's professional and personal annihilation. But that woman no longer existed. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I dressed in my most professional suit, charcoal gray with a silk blouse that commanded respect, and applied makeup with the precision of someone preparing for war. The woman in my bathroom mirror looked like she belonged in a boardroom, like she'd spent years building toward this moment rather than stumbling into it through a misdirected phone call. Kevin left for work with his usual kiss goodbye, completely unaware he was walking into the most important meeting of his life. He'd been particularly cheerful all week, mentioning the emergency board meeting with casual confidence. Probably just quarterly projections, he'd said over breakfast. Gary likes to keep everyone on their toes with these surprise sessions. I arrived at Hartwell Industries 30 minutes early, taking the elevator to the 20th floor where the executive boardroom commanded panoramic views of the city Kevin would soon lose access to forever. The forensic auditors had worked through the night to prepare final documentation, their findings organized into a presentation that would strip away any possibility of denial or deflection. Gary stood at the head of the polished conference table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit tailored to project authority and control. He looked like a man about to deliver justice rather than devastating news, his earlier grief replaced by something far more dangerous. Thank you all for accommodating this emergency session, Gary began as board members filed into their seats. Kevin entered with his usual confidence, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with colleagues who had no idea they were about to witness his professional execution. His confident smile faltered slightly when he noticed me seated at the back of the room, but he recovered quickly, offering a small wave that suggested mild confusion rather than alarm. After all, why would his wife's presence at a company meeting trigger suspicion? We're here today to address a matter of theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty that strikes at the very heart of this organization, Gary announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire and wouldn't allow it to be destroyed from within. The massive screen behind Gary illuminated with financial data that made several board members gasp audibly. Spreadsheets detailed every fraudulent transaction Kevin and Denise had orchestrated, their theft mapped with forensic precision across 18 months of systematic embezzlement. $2.3 million, Gary continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the revelation. Stolen through an elaborate network of shell corporations, fictitious consulting fees, and unauthorized transfers to offshore accounts. Kevin's face went through a fascinating transformation, confusion giving way to recognition, recognition blooming into fear, fear crystallizing into desperate calculation. I watched him realize that his carefully constructed financial crimes had been completely exposed, that his digital footprints had led investigators directly to his secret accounts. Board members who'd trusted Kevin implicitly reacted with visible anger and betrayal. Robert Chin, who'd mentored Kevin during his early years, looked physically ill. Maria Santos, who'd approved Kevin's last promotion, shook her head with disgust. The man they'd considered a rising star in corporate leadership was being revealed as a common thief. The perpetrator used his position of trust to authorize payments to companies that exist only on paper, Gary explained, highlighting specific transactions on the screen. These funds were then laundered through multiple accounts before reaching their final destination: offshore banks in non-extradition territories. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room shift to focus on me as I walked to the front of the boardroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that matched my steady heartbeat. The nervousness I'd expected was absent, replaced by calm determination that surprised me. "The financial evidence is compelling," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "But it doesn't tell the complete story of how we uncovered this conspiracy." I placed my phone on the polished conference table and looked directly at Kevin. His face had progressed from pale to gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's aggressive air conditioning. 3 weeks ago, I answered Kevin's phone thinking it was a work call. Instead, I heard this. I pressed play. Denise's recorded voice filled the elegant boardroom with intimate clarity that made the corporate setting feel suddenly obscene. "You left your underwear here again." The gasps were immediate and visceral, a collective intake of breath from 12 shocked professionals who'd never expected to hear such intimate confessions during a business meeting. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, unsure where to direct their eyes as a married woman's passionate confessions echoed off mahogany walls. "I can't stop thinking about you," Denise's voice continued, her giggle particularly devastating in the sterile corporate environment. Kevin's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his usual eloquence completely abandoned as he watched his secret life broadcast to his professional colleagues. The confident executive who'd entered this room had been replaced by a cornered animal with no escape route. "Last night was unforgettable," the recording concluded, followed by that final damning giggle that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. The silence that followed was profound. Gary's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the quiet menace of a man who'd been betrayed by the two people he'd trusted most completely. "That's my wife's voice," he said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. "Talking to my employee about their affair. And as the financial evidence demonstrates, they weren't just betraying their marriages. They were systematically stealing from this company to fund their relationship." Kevin finally found his voice, but what emerged was desperate and unconvincing. "This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Denise and I were working together to expose financial irregularities in the system. The offshore accounts were honeypots designed to catch the real thieves." His explanation was so obviously fabricated that several board members actually laughed. The man who'd once commanded respect through his intelligence and strategic thinking was now babbling like a child caught with stolen candy. "The evidence shows continued theft up until last week," Gary countered smoothly. "Including your reservation for 2 people at a Charleston resort this weekend. Was your wife planning to join this business investigation?" Kevin's face crumpled as he realized even his most recent lies had been exposed. The vote to terminate his employment was swift and unanimous. 12 hands raised without hesitation, sealing Kevin's professional fate in less than 30 seconds. But Gary had saved his masterstroke for last. "This board now has a vacancy," Gary announced, his eyes never leaving Kevin's devastated face. "A position requiring absolute integrity, unwavering loyalty, and the strategic thinking necessary to protect this company from future threats." He turned to me with something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "I nominate Angela Mitchell for Vice President of Strategic Operations." The second vote was equally swift and unanimous. As I signed my employment contract with hands that had learned not to tremble, federal agents entered the boardroom to place Kevin under arrest. The poetic justice of taking his seat at the table where he'd planned Gary's destruction created a moment of perfect, terrible symmetry. Kevin's final look as security led him away wasn't defeat, it was promise. That look haunted me as I walked through Hartwell Industries' marble lobby 3 hours later, my new corporate key card granting access to elevators and floors that had been Kevin's domain just that morning. The building felt different now, not because the architecture had changed but because my position within it had shifted fundamentally. I was no longer the supportive wife visiting her husband's workplace. I was an executive with my own corner office, my own parking space, my own secretary. The view from Kevin's former office was spectacular. 20 floors above the city, windows stretching from floor to ceiling, the kind of panoramic vista that was supposed to symbolize success and achievement. I sat in his ergonomic leather chair, still warm from his body heat just hours ago, and tried to feel the satisfaction I'd imagined this moment would bring. Instead, I felt hollow. The news trucks gathered outside the building by 4 o'clock, their satellite dishes extending like metallic flowers reaching for scandal. Kevin's arrest had already leaked to local media, and by evening the story would dominate business news coverage. Hartwell Industries executive arrested for embezzlement and corporate espionage scrolled across screens throughout the city, Kevin's professional headshot displayed beside images of him being led away in handcuffs. Denise's arrest an hour later provided additional spectacle. Gary had timed it perfectly, ensuring she was in the Hartwell building when federal agents arrived. The woman who'd manipulated me with false friendship was handcuffed in the same lobby where she'd attended company parties as the respected boss's wife. Employees who'd deferred to her authority watched her downfall with the fascination reserved for witnessing the mighty fall. The legal consequences unfolded with satisfying efficiency. Federal charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy ensured both Kevin and Denise would face decades in prison. Civil forfeiture proceedings immediately froze their offshore accounts, luxury cars, and the Charleston property they'd purchased with stolen funds. The legal machinery that had seemed so abstract during our planning phase became devastatingly real as it ground their lives into dust. But watching Kevin's professional execution on the evening news, I felt none of the triumph I'd expected. His mugshot appeared next to anchors discussing the case with serious expressions, his familiar face transformed into the kind of criminal photograph that would haunt internet searches forever. This was the man I'd loved for 20 years, reduced to a cautionary tale about corporate crime and marital betrayal. My first week as Vice President of Strategic Operations passed in a surreal haze of congratulations and concerned whispers. Colleagues who'd treated me as decoration for years suddenly sought my opinions on major decisions. Patricia, who'd been Gary's assistant, now reported to me with professional deference that felt both gratifying and unearned. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said during my second day, her voice carefully neutral. "The Peterson account needs your approval for the contract modifications." Mrs. Mitchell. Not Angela, not Kevin's wife, but Mrs. Mitchell. A person with authority and influence independent of any relationship to a man. The transformation should have felt empowering, but instead, it reminded me that my new identity had been built on the ruins of my old life. Emma visited my new office the following week, her expression carefully controlled as she examined the symbols of my corporate ascension. The mahogany desk, the original artwork, the expensive coffee machine that came with executive privileges, all of it impressed and worried her in equal measure. "You got everything you wanted," she said, but her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain that was a positive development. "Did I?" I asked, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased my elevated status. "Or did I just become someone I never intended to be?" Emma's concern was justified. Success built on revenge carried a weight that legitimate achievement never would. Every contract I signed, every decision I made, every moment of respect I commanded felt tainted by the knowledge that I'd gained my position through destruction rather than merit. The social consequences proved equally complex. Friends who'd known Kevin and me as a couple struggled to choose sides, with some admiring my strength in exposing his crimes while others whispered about my ruthless pursuit of justice. Dinner party invitations dried up as people wrestled with how to include the woman who'd destroyed her husband's life, even if he'd deserved it. 6 months after Kevin's arrest, I sat in my corner office watching his sentencing hearing broadcast live on the financial news channel. 15 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime of supervised release and restitution payments that would ensure he'd never regain financial stability. The judge's words carried the weight of absolute justice, but I felt none of the satisfaction I'd expected from his complete downfall. Denise received 12 years, her sentence reduced slightly due to cooperation with authorities investigating their network of other victims. She'd looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her usual elegance replaced by institutional anonymity. The woman who'd manipulated me with false friendship had been reduced to a prisoner number and a cautionary tale. But victory felt increasingly hollow as the months passed. My marriage was over, my trust in others permanently damaged, my capacity for forming genuine connections compromised by the calculating person I'd become. The executive who signed million-dollar contracts felt like a stranger wearing my face, successful but fundamentally isolated. Emma's visits became less frequent, our conversations strained by her discomfort with my transformation. "You got justice," she'd said during our last lunch together. "But what did it cost you?" The answer to that question was becoming clearer every day. I'd gained power, respect, and financial security while losing the ability to trust, to love, to connect with others without wondering about their hidden agendas. The woman who'd answered that wrong phone call had been naive but capable of genuine happiness. The executive who'd replaced her was successful but fundamentally alone. As I prepared to leave the office on the anniversary of that life-changing phone call, my desk phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered with the confident authority I'd developed over the past year. "Angela Mitchell." A male voice, polite but carrying unmistakable menace, responded, "Kevin says hello. He'll be eligible for parole in 8 years. We'll be in touch." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at the phone with the same cold dread I'd felt exactly 1 year ago. The message made it clear that Kevin's network of criminal associates remained active, that my newfound security might be temporary, that revenge had created cycles of retaliation that would never truly end. I sat in my corner office, surrounded by the symbols of my victory, and realized that the phone call that had destroyed my marriage might have been just the beginning of a war that would define the rest of my life. Some prices are too high to pay even for perfect revenge. If this story of calculated revenge had you gripping your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Angela played that recording in the boardroom, watching Kevin's face crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.